Hello and welcome to Two Sisters of a Certain Age Conversations with a Therapist and a Doctor. I am your co host, Judy Grant, licensed marriage and family therapist.
And I am your co-host, Dr. Sophia Grant, board-certified pediatrician and board-certified child abuse pediatrician.
So, before we even get into anything, let's just jump right into what is going on with your voice, Candy.
Well, I have a frog in my throat. I brought it from Cuba.
So,
And
you smuggled in a frog.
in my throat, I didn't smuggle in any cigars, but I did have a frog in my throat, and he has taken up residence. So I feel fine, and I'm on steroids, but it's just a touch of laryngitis that I have to work through. So hopefully you guys, it's not too annoying to listen to this podcast with my temporary disability.
So, but I have to say, it might be part of the hooping and hollering that we did in Havana.
Yes, all those cigars that we smoked, all the dancing, all the salsa, all the late nights. That could be it.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yes,
Well, I'm glad that you're feeling good, even though it sounds a little less than pleasant.
yeah, it
Okay.
does.
So, we're going to talk about Cuba today, yeah?
Yes, we are. Yes, we
Okay.
are.
We had a really, really wonderful trip to Cuba.
Yes, we
Um,
did.
I am so eternally grateful for having had that opportunity to really learn about the Cuban people, culture, music, art. Just, it was such a rich experience.
It was like a cultural immersion. You know, it wasn't a vacation. We
No.
learned about the people, the customs, the cultures, and that to me was invaluable and like eye-opening. I think because of Jamaica's proximity to Cuba, I thought the culture would be very similar. Um, and it is in a certain regard, but obviously in Cuba they speak Spanish. Um, and the Cuban people are gorgeous, by the way.
Yes.
And what I noticed was just a wider array of hues. So you can have some dark skinned people, you have some mixed people, you have some people who look white, but they all identify as Cuban,
Yeah.
which I found interesting because the Jamaica's motto is out of many, one people.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the
Mm-hmm.
same thing in Cuba, our neighbor.
Yeah. And th- uh, I mean, there was so much that really struck home with me. I'm going to just talk a little bit about like leaving the airport and getting to our residence where we stayed.
Right.
Um, as we're driving, we're being exposed for the first time to the community, the architecture. But then I started seeing fruits being sold on the side of
Right.
the road, and I saw ganep, which
Yes.
is a Jamaican fruit, and I was so excited to see the ganep. But in
Yes.
Cuba, it's not called ganep,
It's what limoncillo,
something like that.
something like that.
Yes. And it really felt, I knew it was different, but definitely a piece of home was there in Cuba with
Right.
us.
Right. Right.
Our very first excursion was to go and find some fresh coconut water to drink.
Yes. And like drink it on the side of the street.
Yep.
Yes, with a little straw. But before we get started, I want to just say that we did book this tour through Friendly Planet, and this is my fourth trip through Friendly Planet. I am not a traveler who likes to get to a country and wing it, figure out transportation, figure out I like to have stuff done. And so
Hmm.
I just paid Friendly Planet, and I didn't have to think.
No.
Um, most of our money in Cuba was spent tipping people because of the way the economy is set up. People really don't have much, so we spent a lot of money tipping, and it was very similar to when I was in Ghana. I didn't buy much, but I tipped a lot of people, and my
Right.
philosophy is, look how much I have. Look how much I have.
Right.
And it's just like you wanna be a good person, you wanna be a good traveler, you wanna be a good consumer of the
Hmm.
Cuban culture. So that's just how my mind works.
And one of the things, in order to go to Cuba from the United States as a US citizen, you have to meet certain criteria. And in order for us to travel, the criteria that we met was in support of the Cuban people.
Exactly. Exactly.
So, when you are there, what are you doing to support the Cuban people?
Exactly.
And that shows up immediately when our amazing guide, Joyce's, took us to our casa. It's
Yes.
not a hotel, it is a casa. It is someone's actual home that they may have renovated into multiple rooms, and it's really a bed and breakfast, but it's a
Right.
private residence as
Right.
opposed to one of the big hotels by some conglomerate.
Yes, and as Americans, I don't think we can stay in those big hotels
No.
because they don't take American credit cards. We were told that maybe somebody from Canada can book it, but the Americans don't stay in those hotels. You kind of need to stay in these casas.
And the beautiful thing about the casa is that it is smack dab in the middle of a
Havana.
community.
Yes, yes,
It's central Havana. There are private residences next to us. There was a primary school across from us. We were in it. It
right,
wasn't a tourist at a resort.
right,
We were
right,
in central Havana, really seeing the people throughout the course of the day.
right. And the architecture for these homes, it's 200 years old. It's
Yes.
not like a brand new house. So these are rock solid buildings with multiple rooms, and obviously whoever owns it used to have money, has money, because these are multiple rooms, big kitchen, dining room, and so you see a lot of the old architecture, and a lot of it there's been deferred maintenance. Not where we were, but I was pointing out to Judy one time that like the buildings are beautiful and they're kind of crumbling, and there's like this beauty in the
Hmm.
decay. And
Hmm.
I don't mean that pejoratively, but just seeing how the elements take over this beautiful house and seeing peeling paint. I don't know, there was something struck me about that.
I agree. It really adds to the flavor
Right.
of the country to see that. And then, the flip side is that Cuba is really making an effort to restore a
Right.
lot of these buildings, historical buildings, and just, everyday buildings. And you see that restoration taking place. And for instance, the Capitola, which is their big Capitol building, absolutely gorgeous.
Perfection.
And that
Perfection.
that was restored. The restoration was completed in 2019. So not long ago, people. But when you go, it's breathtaking.
It
And
really
it's
is.
also very reminiscent of American architecture.
Yes.
And Joyce has shared with us that, Cubans so fascinated with America that there were a lot of American influences brought to the
Right.
island, and you can see that in some of the architecture.
Right.
Now, there are other aspects of the architecture that you're never going to see here in the United States.
Right.
Forts, forts that were built to
Right.
protect the island,
Yes.
like cannons,
Yes. Yes.
cannons to shoot out at the pirates trying to
Yes.
invade the island. I mean,
Yes.
oh my gosh, it was like
And
I was taken aback.
and there were places that were like Spanish warehouses where when you got the gold and the bounty from all the places that the Spaniards looted, Cuba was like a way station where they would store it. And so they had to protect themselves from pirates coming to loot the loot.
Hmm.
So,
Yeah.
yeah, 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 that was fabulous.
So, wow, there's so much to share here.
Okay,
I,
go ahead. Let's talk about my favorite alcoholic beverage, which is a mojito.
the mojito.
So I had a mojito with practically every meal except breakfast. And
I think you would have had it with breakfast too, Candy. Come
yes,
on.
but we learned how to make the perfect mojito. And I thought I knew how to make mojitos. It turns out the secret is to use honey,
And
not
dark rum.
in dark rum, not a simple syrup. And then I don't know if you've ever had a mojito where you have all of this mint trash you have to strain in between your teeth. What we were taught was you crush the stem and not the leaves.
Hmm.
And so I had a perfect mojito and
So
learned
let
how
me
to
just
make it.
share that the mojito experience when we learned how to make this, we were actually, we spent the morning at an organic farm
Yes,
with
yes,
Jesus, who was the farmer.
right,
And he was talking about just the importance of creating this farm for the community.
right.
And we tasted fresh chives and basil and just all of these wonderful ingredients that he was growing at the farm. Immediately following that conversation, we then went over to a restaurant, which is provided.
Ingredients.
The ingredients are provided by Jesus and his farm. So
Right.
now we're in this restaurant and we have an opportunity to do a little cooking and a little bartending. And you and I started off in the kitchen with
Yes,
the chefs
yes,
and we made a lobster dish
right,
using the dark rum.
right. Like I didn't know that when you're making rum, making lobster, you can put rum on it. So,
Right.
and that came as a surprise. So, we cut the lobster tail open, we cut the meat out, we season it. I think Judy, I was by the pot and you were sprinkling the
Yeah, I was
seasoning,
doing the brown sugar, salt,
salt.
garlic.
Right, right. And then so I'm kind of stirring it, and then they have Judy pour rum on it, and before you know it, there's a fire. And I'm like, "Oh my god, this is a polyester dress. I am gonna go up in flames." But it was so much fun. It
It
was
was so much fun.
unexpected. Yes.
I,
Yes.
I will say, let me go back to before we even began cooking. Our chefs told us the only way to start cooking is with a shot of the dark
Yes,
rum.
yes, yes. So we had to take shots before we
Yes.
entered the kitchen. And
Yeah.
I think and we just said yes to it. And that was the theme of this trip
Right.
is it's not something you would normally do, but I'm gonna say yes to
I'm
these
saying yes to
experiences.
everything.
You gotta
Yes to
take the shot
everything.
to cook. Let me take the shot. You
Right.
wanna
And
go,
I,
yeah, you gotta smoke a cigar? Let's smoke it.
right. Because I think you and I really wanted to be a part of this. We did not
Right,
want to be bystanders. We
right.
wanted to be in it. We wanted to be a part of this whole experience. So, following our cooking, we then went out to the bar where we learned how to make this fabulous mojito.
Right.
I'm going to tell you, I ordered a mojito yesterday. I was out with Rick and, just a little lunch. And I said, "Can we do that Cuban style, please?" "Oh, what do you mean by that?" I said, "Honey and dark rum, and do not smash my mint leaves."
You
Just,
sound like such a snob now.
I was such a snob. And I said it. I said, "Look, I'm going to be a mojito snob right now. And I recognize this, but I just came back from Cuba and this is what I'm looking for."
How
And the
was
bartender,
it?
the bartender was really cool. And he's like, "You've taught me something." And it wasn't as good as what we had, but
Right,
it was a start. But
right,
I am determined to make them in my home
right.
because,
But remember the day after we learned how to make that mojito. I had mojito with lunch and it was completely different. And I
right.
said very loudly, and I don't think the other 7 people on the tour were used to seeing me in this light. I said, I can't drink this shit.
No, no, you can't. Because we just had a fabulous one. But I think, Candy, remember that place where we were, that was the National Hotel. That was a very touristy
True,
location.
true.
And I think they made the mojitos the way tourists are accustomed to having mojitos, not really the Cuban way.
Right, right,
So the beautiful thing about Friendly Planet is we had these experiences that regular average tourists would not have.
right, 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 right.
So something else I just want to point out is the commitment that this country has to the arts.
Yes.
We, on two occasions, we went to two community cultural arts centers. We heard from the artists. We heard about the history of the location. We saw the art that was being created. We purchased some of that
Right.
art to bring
Yes.
home. But it was such a strong commitment to the community because children from that community could go to that location and learn how to paint, learn how to
Right.
dance, film, television.
Yes.
And I was,
And it's all free. It's
and it's
free.
all free. And I was so struck by that because we know that our educational system in the United States is slowly taking away the arts from our kids.
Right.
But
Right.
this is a commitment that Cuba has made to the community.
Right.
Now, truly a phenomenal experience was when we went to a music school.
Oh my
And
gosh.
it was an afternoon, and we
It was hot
went,
as hell.
it
Chitty,
was,
we cannot talk about Cuba without talking about how hot and sweaty we were.
oh my gosh, sweat through my clothes every day,
And
every day.
I'm not a sweater. And then like when it's dripping off your nose, down your back, into your bike
Yes,
rack, it's a
yes,
lot of sweat.
it's a lot
The,
of sweat.
there were a few guys on the trip. It was 9 of us on the tour, and some of them were smart enough to bring cloths
Yes.
to wipe off their sweat, like Whitney Houston used to do when she was
And,
performing.
I don't know who I thought I was because I would wake up in the morning, put on a little makeup, thinking I'm all cute and stuff, and then go out and be wiping off
Yes.
everything with just napkins that I had brought because you were glistening throughout the course of the day. So, back to the music school. So we get to this music school and we're placed in a room, and it's a sweat box,
Yes.
um,
No
and we
fan.
have about 20 young people, 14 to 24, playing different instruments, drums, guitar, ukulele, singing. And it got to a point, Candy, where this young woman was singing and I was crying. I was so moved
She
by what I
sh
saw in that
It
room.
was so soulful. It was so intense, and I was crying also, and I was just, like, thinking of the beauty in what they're creating and knowing that it's all free.
Right.
And this was just a little excursion that the tour group decided to add on, and honestly, it was one of the highlights of the trip for me.
Yeah. To see those people, those young kids playing. And they were in Spain
Right,
for
right.
traveling for 2 or 3 weeks and
Yes,
also in New York.
yes,
So
yes.
they have had exposure beyond Cuba to see how life is
Yeah,
like in other
yeah.
countries through this free program in their community.
And
I, I'm
some of them performing, they had taken the music lessons for 4 years, but the one there with the longest term of taking classes was 14 years.
and if I'm not mistaken, she was like 18. So
Yeah,
she'd been taking since she was just an itty bitty little girl.
right, right, right. It was such a beautiful, beautiful experience.
And this is what I'm talking about, the Cuban commitment to the arts.
Right,
So
right.
I'm just going to segue into a little salsa
So, yes.
because we had the pleasure of having an actual salsa
Salsa lesson.
dance lesson.
Yes. Yeah, that was
Another
so much
sweat
fun.
box,
It was so much fun. So
but
much fun.
so much fun. And at first, we have our instructor and showing us the basic steps, the forward, the backward, the side to side. And he's like, okay. And it's just the instructor and like his partner that are showing us the moves, showing the men, showing the women. All right. And then it's like, okay, it's time to dance. And I'm thinking, well, Candy and I are going to dance together. Oh no. Out of the woodwork,
All these dancers show up.
all of these dancers show up and they're paired up with us. And I am dancing with this young man who really enjoyed improv because I'm thinking, I didn't learn that step
Right,
10 minutes ago.
right,
And he
right.
was singing, and we were just Wow, what an experience that
It was
was.
so much fun. Ridiculous fun.
So, so much fun. And going back to the tips, this is where we're tipping people. We
Yes.
tipped at the music school. We tipped our dancers. We, just whomever was there to help enhance our experience, they got something from us.
Right, right, right. And you know, when I think about, remember when we went to that place and that woman, I think she was 83 or
83 years
84,
old. 83 years old.
and
Best hype woman I've ever met.
she was doing it and working. The way it seemed like she was a better dancer than she was a walker. Like when
Right.
she would walk, she would look frail, but when she started dancing, it was
Yes.
almost like, oh, I've been doing this for 50 something years, 80 years, you know?
And that happened when we were at one of these cultural arts centers, and they said, "We have a surprise for you upstairs." And, Candy and I have now bought these beautiful wooden sculptures, and we're just enjoying the environment and the people. And we go upstairs, and there's like a seven-piece band to
Yes,
play for us,
yes, yes.
just for us, plus the 83-year-old hype woman.
Yes. Oh my gosh, that was so great.
Yeah, so very unexpected, but you see the importance of music in everything they do. We heard live music every day.
Yes,
We danced every day.
and we went to, you guys have heard of the Buena Vista Social Club,
Yes.
um, Grammy Award winning Latin jazz. So we went to that club, and it was kind of like all these people who were big stars back in the day. They would come and sing two songs, and more people would. It was like a review,
Yes.
and
Hmm.
that was really fun. And I want to point out that I was called to the stage twice.
Oh, good Lord. Yes,
Yes,
she was. Well,
yes,
we both went up together.
yes, yes. And then I was called to the stage a second time because I was so good the first time. And that was so much fun. Oh my gosh, it just felt really good to be so immersed. Like I didn't feel, I felt like I was just in the Cuban cultures as much as I can be as a
Right.
foreigner, you
Right.
know? Judy, let's talk about the food. People
Let's
always want
talk
to talk
about the
about
food.
food.
So, okay, so the biggest surprise to me was I expected to have black beans and rice with every meal.
Mhm.
And more often than not, I'm like, do we not have black beans? Oh, no, no.
Right,
So that was interesting. We did eventually have it, but it was not just a common part of a meal.
right.
Um, we had lobster a lot,
Yes.
and
I eat
it
a
was
lot of lobster.
very, very inexpensive.
Right.
Candy and I went to a dinner on our own at Michifu,
Uh,
and we both ordered. Oh no, that's the night that you got lobster. I didn't get lobster that night, but we had a lobster dinner the previous night at the high heel shoe restaurant,
nice.
633 and the Boulevard. So we went up there and we had this lobster dinner and plus mojitos, and it was less than $30 in
Right.
total.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now, in LA, you can't get one lobster meal for
For
$30.
$30, right. And then the next place we went, at Mafichu, I can't remember. Um, Lobster, it was like two lobster tails splayed
Yes.
open. It almost looked like chicken, and that was really good, and I think that might have been even less than
That was less. You had the lobster and I had a chicken dish that night, and it was $22 plus drinks.
right,
And
right,
so, I think as Americans coming in, you're like, whoa, this is nothing. But you know what? I'm still going to tip
right.
like I would.
According to in America.
Yes.
Yeah,
Because one of the things that we learned was salaries aren't very big.
right,
Regardless of the job that you hold, salaries are not very large in Cuba. So, according to Joyce's, our guide, everybody's got a side hustle.
right.
Everybody's figuring out a way that they can get a little bit more money. So, um, when you are a wait person in a restaurant, I prefer to give the tips, but then in that restaurant, they might be able to take home the leftovers for their family.
Right.
Or if if the restaurant is so inclined, they will take things home and then sell them to
Right.
other people
Right.
because everybody is trying to survive. And
Right.
that's definitely one of the more challenging aspects of being a Cuban citizen is that resources are scarce and money is scarce.
Right.
And they utilize a ration system where every family gets a little book and it details who's in your home. Oh, you have a family of 4, and everybody's listed with their names and their ages and their genders. So then when you take your ration book to be redeemed, oh, that family of 4 gets 4 pieces of bread that day. They need to
Right.
come back the following day to get 4 more pieces. But
Right.
also that family might get 5 pounds of rice for the month, 1
Right.
pound of chicken for the month. And
Five,
you're thinking,
5 eggs per person per month.
right. And you're thinking, 1 pound of chicken, I pick up like 8 pounds in Costco and I don't even think about it. But these things need to be rationed because they just do not have the abundance the
Right.
way we do.
Right. And we were told like a physician in Cuba makes about $300 a month.
Let's
So
repeat that because people are going to think they heard incorrectly.
a physician in Cuba makes about $300 a month. There's no such thing as a private practice. You are employed by the government. So we were told that many physicians, they may see the people, but people might bring them, some oil or some flour or some powdered milk to help supplement the income. The vast majority of the people in tourism have advanced degrees.
Hmm.
Our driver was an engineer, and our guide, she had her degree in economics. And she said they all go into tourism because there's a possibility of making tips.
Right.
And she said that the Cuban life wasn't as harsh when the Soviet Union existed because they were being subsidized by the Soviet Union. But with the collapse of that regime, then they had to fend for themselves and things became a lot more difficult. So, what was repeated is, you do these things to survive and you turn into a criminal. Because if you have a mango tree and you said, "Oh my gosh, I can sell these mangoes." If you do so, you have to get a license from the government and they take 50% of what you make. So of
Right.
course, if you have a mango tree, you're going to try and hustle and make more money and not register. But you can end up in jail.
Right.
So everything, there's a big black market in Cuba. And people are trying to weave and figure out how to survive. I was told that families don't have many kids because frequently there's not enough food to feed these kids.
Yeah.
So it's a very harsh reality. Um, we were told that if you want to bring donations, you can, and I brought donations, things like pencils, sanitary products, soap,
Hmm.
ibuprofen. The people really need that. We walked by a pharmacy, and Judy, talk about the pharmacy.
So the pharmacy, this was, like a sucker punch to me. I think pharmacy, I'm thinking CVS, Walgreens,
Right,
what have
right,
you. Not so in Cuba. So we approached a pharmacy, and there's a woman working there, and there are wooden shelves, like a counter, and then
right,
shelves above and around her. And there might have been 12 bottles of medication on all of those shelves.
Right.
Things are just not readily available. So
Right.
when Candy and I left, and I didn't think of packing donations. I'm so glad that my sister did. But when we left, all of the travel meds that I usually have with me, I
You
left.
just left them. Yeah.
I just left them
Yeah.
because
Stabilizer.
they might not have access to Advil. But I've
Right.
got one of those little travel size Advils, so I'm
Right.
going to leave that. So it very sobering at times. But what I want to also point out is throughout all of the challenges that these people face, there was such joy and
Yes.
there was such resilience and
Right.
perseverance.
Right.
And there was no like, woe is me.
Right.
It's like, we're still going to make this life and we're still going to be a joyous people. I loved seeing families. We would come home later in the evening after having dinner, been out, and it's hot, and families are like sitting at their front
At the
step
doorway. Yeah.
at the doorway. The kids are playing kick the can,
Yeah. In the
and
street.
in the street, kids are walking up and down. Like, I see little ones. I'm like, you're 6 years old. Where the hell are you going? It's 10:30 at night. But there is such a feeling of safety around. And initially you wouldn't think like, oh, this is a safe environment. But when you walk around it, you're like, oh no, people aren't out to hurt anybody.
Right. I was never scared.
No.
Never scared.
My only concern is like, what was the name of our block? Where is that?
Right. Right. Right.
Like,
We're like,
are we going to find it?
right. Am I going to find my way home?
Right. Yeah, but it was, you know, and the Cuban people like Americans. They appreciate us coming. They appreciate what we can do to help bolster their economy, and they really appreciate teaching us about the culture.
Right.
We went to this beautiful photography gallery,
Right.
and the originating photographer,
What was
very
his name?
famous. I can't
Luis?
remember. I'm gonna have to look back into my
Okay.
notes.
All
This
right.
very famous Cuban photographer who was the official photographer for Fidel Castro.
Right.
And we saw images that he'd created of Fidel, of the Cuban people. We learned how he became recognized internationally, and that was by a journalist from New York that came to see the work under the guise of being an art collector.
Right.
And the gentleman showed the work, so on and so forth, and this journalist then went back and wrote a piece about his work, and immediately internationally known photographer. And so his work was incredibly significant to the history of the country. Another piece of work that we saw that he created was a photograph of Anselmo. Candy, who is Anselmo?
Anselmo is the man who inspired Ernest Hemingway to write The Old Man and the Sea.
Yeah.
And we went to the fishing village where that story takes place, where and
Right.
there's a bust, a statue of Ernest Hemingway there.
Yes, the Cuban people
Hemingway's a
really,
big deal in Cuba. They
yes,
showed his house, his hotel,
where he would, what little
bar.
restaurant and bar he would hang out at. They really talk a lot about Ernest Hemingway and the impact that he had on the country. And it was, again, like this deep dive into the culture that I'm so appreciative of. I want to just touch on a little bit about the political scene. And as Americans, I'm not like politically savvy, so just bear with me. But we know a few things about Cuba: Bay of Pigs, Cuban Missile Crisis, Fidel Castro.
Fidel.
So we know those three things. But when you go to Cuba, you find out so much more about the politics then and now. We learned about the revolution, and what that was like for the people. And we learned that while the Cuban people recognized that Fidel might have done some less than pleasant things, he was also very informative with the people. They would gather at Revolution Square, where he would speak to the masses and tell them about the state of the country. And it might have been his version, but he spoke to the people and talked to them directly about what was going on. And because of that, they felt that
Right,
he was truly a leader.
right, but he used to speak for 6 and 7 hours.
This is true, a little long.
That's really oppressive. Our guy told us that there were hundreds of assassination attempts on Fidel Castro, over 600. And so when he was alive, nobody really knew where he lived. Like people thought he lived in one place, but maybe he didn't because they were afraid that he was going to be killed. Um, Also, I asked, like, what do people feel about Cuba? And we were told that, the young people want change.
Hmm.
And I mean, young people always want change, but I think, based on my interaction, it's incredibly oppressive. Um, but that's me. But it doesn't take away from the joy that I saw in the Cuban people. And I really don't want to trivialize or act like I know much. But it's such a vibrant, rich culture. And I would love to go back and see other parts of the island. Cuba has 22 million people, and 2 million of those people are in Havana.
Yeah, yeah.
So there's lots more to see.
So that kind of surprised me. Like I always knew that Cuba was bigger than Jamaica, but holy smokes, this
I
place is
know,
huge.
I know,
It's
I
huge.
know. It's massive,
Yeah,
massive.
Jamaica you could drive around in a couple of days, right?
Mhm, mhm.
Cuba, it's going to take you some time, and
Right,
so I'm with you. I would love to go back and see more of it, um, and just to experience a different side of Cuba. Because one of my uh, disappointments was that we didn't get to go to the beach,
right,
but we stayed primarily in Havana, in the different districts within central Havana, and the beach is 40 kilometers away. And so just did not have the time for that.
right,
So that is
right,
on my list for the next time.
right. Judy, you know what? We need to talk about the unexpected art. Like we'd be
Oh,
driving around and see a sculpture, or you're in a plaza, and it would be like on the side of the road, and you're like, where did this come from? But
yeah.
it was just kind of interspersed with things, and it wouldn't necessarily be a gallery, but it would
No.
just be there, and it would just kinda make you stop in your tracks and say, "Oh my gosh, this is so beautiful."
Right. Right. As you're speaking of that, also want to touch on the religion,
Yeah,
because it's there is Catholicism.
right.
We saw a Russian Orthodox church.
Yeah,
Um, Joyce has told us about Jewish synagogues. There are a
yes,
lot of different religions being practiced in Cuba, and Santeria is one of those religions where they worship Santeria. It was a figurine that was found coming from the sea, and until that figurine was found, the fishermen were not finding fish, were not catching fish in the sea. And then they find this figurine, and the very next day they start catching fish.
right,
So Cubans carry a picture of Santeria in their wallet as a protector,
right,
a provider
right.
to the people. But you see where these different religions kind of blend together.
There's a
And
lot of African religions, and so
yes,
we were told that even if you're Catholic in Cuba, you practice Santeria in your house. There's
yes,
no person who is just 100% Catholic. Everybody has this mezcla, this mix of kind of traditional religions, stuff that was carried over from Africa. And then you have these acolytes of Santeria, and they go through a whole training where they wear white, and, there are other requirements. But, you know, I'd see people wearing white. I'm like, what's up with that? But it was there, they were in training for the Santeria religion.
Yeah. So just a lot of like real history um, to the religion of the people. We went into this absolutely stunning church, and there was Santeria, and there was a kneeling bench, and I felt compelled, and I knelt, and I said a prayer to Santeria. And I'm not Cuban, but I was there and I was feeling it, and it felt like the right thing to do. And I got up, and this Cuban family came and knelt and said their prayers. And I don't know, I was just very, very touched by the religious history of the people. I want to touch on how often Cuba feels like a throwback to a different time. And you can see that through the classic American cars that were imported to the island.
Yeah.
They were everywhere, and they were beautiful. Some really kept up, like in pristine condition, and others, just a regular old car driving around. We had an opportunity on our last evening to take a tour in a classic car, and it was a 1951 Chevrolet convertible, yellow.
Yes.
Gorgeous. And I don't know what we were thinking, but it was like we were movie stars. The scarves were waving, the sunglasses were on, and I was giddy like a child in the back of that car.
And we drove through this like nature preserve. It was
There's a
like,
forest
yeah,
in
like a
Havana.
jungle in the middle of Havana. You see these banyan trees and all of this stuff, greenery and water, and it was just absolutely spectacular.
Yeah, really, really took your breath away.
And
It,
our car was what, 72 years old.
yeah,
Yeah,
really
and
breath
and
away.
then our driver, he had only had the car for 5 years,
Right.
and it was his business to drive people around.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
So again, somebody else that's enhancing our experience, and we tip them because
right,
that's what you do.
right,
That's
right.
what we did. Um, it was just such a wonderful experience. We said yes to Cuba. We want
Yes,
you to say yes to Cuba.
yes,
If
yes.
you have any interest at all, please find your way to visit that country, to experience it. And do me a favor, book a tour.
Yes.
Learn about the people, learn about the history, the religion, the music, the arts, everything. Because you're not going to get that if you just get off the plane and stay in an Airbnb, or one of the big fancy hotels, or just lay around on the beach. If you want to really learn about the country and the people, do yourself the favor and book a tour.
See?
See, yes. Oh, people were so impressed by Candy's Spanish. She was translating, she
Oh, yes.
was talking to the people, and people were very impressed with that.
Right, right. Well, let's not forget, I thought I was going to marry a Cuban man because of my Spanish, the proximity to Jamaica, but that never happened. There's still
No,
hope. There's still
there's
hope.
still there's still hope. So, I think as we wrap up this Cuba debrief, I just want to say that I'm so eternally grateful for having had that opportunity.
Yeah, me too.
From sweating through my clothes to drinking the rum to learning about the politics, the people, the culture. I'm so happy that I was able to take that trip and do it with my sister.
Yeah,
We oh my God, we laugh. It's
yeah, we're
ridiculous.
stupid. We're
We are
stupid.
stupid in the best possible way,
Right.
but we make really good travel partners.
Yes, we do.
But I do want to thank Friendly Planet. I want to thank Joyces. I want to thank Lazarito, who was our driver, for really making this experience so incredibly special.
And all the other people who were share with us.
Yeah.
They were fun too.
They were so fun. We had people from DC, from Virginia, from New York, from San Francisco. And it was such a good group of people to experience everything with.
Yes, yes.
Yeah. Thank you so much for joining us today as we debriefed our Cuba trip. We at s2e7 are so grateful to have you join us on these conversations and to really engage with us. So feel free to reach out to us at our email address, which is s2e7podcast@gmail.com. Your comments, your questions are greatly appreciated. And we would love to hear when you plan your next trip to Cuba. So, if you love to travel, if you love to learn about different places, different people, different things, and to immerse yourself into the newness of a different country, please know that we can relate.
No Longer Network.